During Christmas dinner, my son-in-law screamed right in my face, "You don't belong here, old man. Go back to your trailer park." He laughed like the whole world belonged to him. I just smiled calmly and pointed to the other side of the table. When he saw who was sitting there, his face turned pale and he started shaking. The man who had betrayed and mocked me was about to learn that his arrogance would not go unpunished. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. My name is Roland Cunningham, and I'm 68 years old. I live in a modest two-story house on Hawthorne Boulevard in Portland, Oregon. Spent 35 years as an insurance fraud investigator before I retired. People think that job is boring, pushing papers, checking numbers. But let me tell you something. When you spend 3 decades watching people lie about money, you develop a certain clarity about human nature. You learn to see beneath the surface. You learn patience. And most importantly, you learn that the truth always finds a way out, no matter how deep someone tries to bury it. I also learned that sometimes the people closest to you are the best liars. My daughter Veronica is 34 now. She used to be my whole world. I remember when she was 7, she'd wait by the window every evening, watching for my car. The second I'd pull into the driveway, she'd burst through the front door, running so fast her braids would fly behind her. "Daddy, did you catch any bad guys today?" she'd ask, her eyes wide with that innocent excitement only children have. I'd scoop her up, spin her around, and we'd spend the evening talking about everything and nothing. She wanted to be a detective, just like me. Said we'd be partners someday. That was a lifetime ago. 3 years back, Veronica met Kyle Bishop at some networking event in downtown Portland. He's a financial consultant, or at least that's what his business card says. 36 years old, sharp suits, expensive watch, hair always perfectly styled. The kind of man who measures his worth in dollar signs and thinks everyone else should too. Within 6 months, they were engaged. Within a year, married. And within 18 months, my daughter started looking at me the way you'd look at an old jacket you're embarrassed to be seen wearing. It started small. I'd suggest we grab lunch at our favorite diner, the one where we'd celebrated every one of her achievements since she was a kid. And she'd say, "Dad, Kyle and I are really busy these days. Maybe some other time." That other time never came. Then she stopped inviting me to their apartment. When I'd call, her answers got shorter. "Everything's fine, Dad. Just busy with work." Her voice had this new quality to it, distant, like she was reading from a script someone else had written. I knew who wrote that script. Kyle never said anything directly, not at first. He was smarter than that. It was all subtle. Little comments dropped casually into conversations. "Veronica tells me you've lived in the same house for 30 years, Roland. Ever think about upgrading?" Or, "Must be nice being retired. No pressure to keep up with the world anymore." He'd say these things with a smile, but his eyes stayed cold, calculating, like he was taking my measure and finding me wanting. The real shift happened about a year ago. Veronica came by the house, a rare visit by then. She walked through the living room like she'd never seen it before, her gaze sweeping over my worn furniture, the old photos on the walls, the scratched coffee table I'd had since before she was born. "Dad," she said carefully, "have you ever thought about downsizing? I mean, this place is so big for just you." Downsizing, that's what Kyle called it, I'm sure. What she meant was, "This house embarrasses me now." "I like it here," I told her. "It's home." She didn't meet my eyes. "Kyle says we should think about our future. Plan ahead. He says keeping resources tied up in, well, in things that don't appreciate. It's not smart." I wanted to ask her since when she let someone else tell her what to think. I wanted to remind her of all the nights we spent in this living room, her doing homework at that scratch table while I helped with algebra problems. I wanted to ask if Kyle knew that I'd paid for her college education every single semester without loans. But I didn't. I just nodded and said, "Whatever makes you happy, honey." The phone calls became even less frequent after that. Twice a month, then once. Then only on my birthday, and even that felt obligatory. I spent my days the way I always had, working on my motorcycles in the garage, old Harleys mostly, bikes from the 60s that I'd buy broken and restore piece by piece. It's meditative work. You take something people have written off as worthless and you bring it back to life. You see potential where others see junk. Some people don't understand that. Kyle certainly doesn't. He once saw me working on a '67 Harley Davidson and laughed. That thing belongs in a museum, Roland, or a scrapyard. I just kept working. Patience, remember? As Christmas approached, I made a decision. One last attempt. I'd host a dinner. A real family Christmas like we used to have. I called Veronica in early December. She hesitated. I could hear her asking Kyle something in the background, his voice too low for me to make out the words. Finally, "Okay, Dad, we'll come. Kyle has a big meeting on the 26th, so we can't stay long, but we'll be there." Not, "We'd love to come." Not, "That sounds wonderful." Just, "We'll be there." Like checking an item off a to-do list. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing. Cleaned the house top to bottom. Bought a small tree and decorated it with the ornaments Veronica had made as a child. Little construction paper angels and painted pine cones. I went to the specialty grocery store across town and got all her favorite ingredients for dinner. Splurged on a nice wine. Found the perfect gift for her. A vintage compass necklace, the kind she'd always admired in antique shops when she was younger, back when we used to go to antique shops together. The evening of the 24th, my phone rang. Veronica. "Hey, Dad." Her voice had that practiced cheerfulness people use when they're delivering news they know you won't like. "So Kyle wants me to remind you that we can only stay for a couple of hours tomorrow. He has that meeting the next morning, and he needs to prepare. You understand, right?" I understood perfectly. I understood that Kyle had decided exactly how much of Veronica's time I deserved, and it wasn't much. "Of course," I said. "I'm just glad you're coming." "Great. We'll see you around 5. Oh, and Dad?" Kyle asked if maybe we could keep things casual. Not too much fuss? Not too much fuss? Meaning, don't embarrass us by trying too hard. Don't remind everyone that you actually care. "Sure thing, honey." After she hung up, I sat in my garage for a while, looking at the motorcycles. In the corner was the '67 Harley I'd been restoring for the past year. It was almost finished. Original parts, authentic paint job, everything done right. Someone once offered me $45,000 for it. I said no. Some things aren't for sale. I thought about the compass necklace waiting upstairs, wrapped in silver paper. And I thought about Kyle Bishop, who'd never once asked me about my work, my life, or anything that didn't directly affect him, who looked at my home like it was a stain on his reputation, who'd systematically convinced my daughter that her father wasn't worth her time. I smiled to myself in the darkness of that garage. See, Kyle didn't know much about me. He didn't know that I'd spent 35 years investigating fraud, didn't know that I could spot a liar from across a room, didn't know that I'd built quite a comfortable life for myself, quietly, without fanfare or expensive watches. Most importantly, he didn't know that I'd already made a phone call that afternoon to an old business associate, confirming that yes, he'd be delighted to join us for Christmas dinner. The 25th of December dawned cold and clear. I was ready. Christmas morning felt strange. I'd woken up early, old habits from decades of early shifts, and spent an hour in the kitchen checking and rechecking everything. The turkey was perfect. The side dishes were ready. The table was set for 7. Me, Veronica, Kyle, my cousin Chester, and his wife Martha, my elderly neighbor Mr. Olson, and one more. The extra place setting sat on the far side of the table, positioned just right. I remember standing in the doorway between the kitchen and dining room, looking at that 7th chair and feeling something shift inside me. For 3 years I'd been the accommodating father, the one who accepted fewer calls, shorter visits, dismissive comments, the one who smiled and nodded while his daughter slowly drifted away, pulled by currents I couldn't fight. Not anymore. The doorbell rang at 5 minutes past 5. Through the window I watched Kyle's Mercedes pull into the driveway. Black, gleaming, probably leased, but he'd never admit that. He climbed out first, adjusting his watch, looking at my house the way a health inspector looks at a failing restaurant. Veronica emerged from the passenger side, wearing a dress I didn't recognize. Expensive, not her usual style. I wondered if Kyle had picked it out. I opened the door before they could knock. "Merry Christmas!" Veronica smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She hugged me quickly, the kind of hug you give to distant relatives at funerals. "Merry Christmas, Dad." Kyle extended his hand. His grip was firm, practiced, the handshake of a man who'd read books about body language and first impressions. "Roland, thanks for having us." Not "Merry Christmas," not "Good to see you." Just acknowledgement that he'd shown up. Chester and Martha arrived minutes later, full of genuine warmth and holiday cheer. Mr. Olson shuffled in shortly after, bringing homemade cookies, his late wife's recipe. These were people who actually wanted to be here. The contrast was painful. We gathered in the living room while I finished setting out appetizers. Kyle immediately began cataloging everything wrong with my life. "Roland, you've really lived in this house your whole adult life? Same neighborhood?" He looked around like he was conducting an appraisal. "I have to say, a man your age, I would have expected you to be somewhere more, I don't know, appropriate?" Chester frowned. Martha suddenly became very interested in her drink. Veronica's cheeks flushed, but she said nothing. "I like it here," I said simply. Kyle laughed. Sure, I get it. Sentimental attachment. But from a financial perspective..." "Kyle works in finance," Veronica interrupted, her voice carrying that proud tone you use when you want everyone to know you married well. "He's doing really well. One of the top consultants at his firm." "Cascade Investment Group," Kyle added, because of course he did. "We manage portfolios for some of Portland's wealthiest families. I've personally overseen investments totaling more than $50 million this year." Mr. Olson nodded politely. Chester made an impressed sound. I said nothing, just watched Kyle puff up like a peacock, displaying its feathers. We moved to the dining room. That's when Kyle noticed the garage door was slightly ajar, giving a view of my workshop and the motorcycles inside. His eyes locked onto the '67 Harley. "Oh my!" He actually laughed out loud. "Roland, please tell me you don't still mess around with that junk. Those old bikes are worthless. Do you know what you could get for that garage space if you cleared it out? Rent it as storage. Actually make some money instead of wasting time on classic motorcycles," I supplied quietly. "Trash," Kyle corrected. "Seriously, man. At your age, you should be simplifying. Living in an apartment, maybe. Something manageable. Not buried in this... He gestured vaguely at my house, my belongings, my entire life. This trailer park situation." The silence that followed was absolute. Even Veronica stopped mid-reach for her wineglass. Chester and Martha stared at their plates. Mr. Olson's cookies suddenly became fascinating. Kyle didn't seem to notice, or care. He was too busy laughing at his own joke, taking a sip of wine like he'd just made a brilliant observation. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger. I'd been angry before, many times. This was different. This was clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when someone finally shows you exactly who they are, and you decide you're done pretending not to see it. I set down my fork very carefully, looked at Kyle, let the silence stretch just long enough to make everyone uncomfortable. Then I smiled. "Kyle," I said, my voice perfectly calm, "why don't you turn around and meet the gentleman sitting on the other side of the table?" Kyle's smile faltered. "What?" "The other guest," I continued, "right behind you. I think you two know each other." Kyle turned in his chair, probably expecting another neighbor or distant relative. Instead, he found himself looking directly at David Torres. Immaculate suit, salt and pepper hair, the kind of presence that commands a room without effort. The kind of presence Kyle tried so hard to manufacture and would never achieve. I watched the color drain from Kyle's face like water from a sink. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. David smiled professionally. "Hello, Kyle. Merry Christmas." Mr. Torres," Kyle's voice came out strangled. I didn't... What are you..." "Roland invited me," David said smoothly. "We've been friends for quite some time. Business associates, actually." Veronica looked confused, glancing between her husband and this stranger. "I don't understand. Who..." "David Torres," I said, keeping my voice conversational, "is the CEO of Cascade Investment Group. Kyle's boss. His boss's boss, actually." The room went silent again, but this was a different kind of silence. The kind where everyone suddenly understands that something significant is happening, even if they don't yet know what. Kyle looked like he might be sick. His hands were gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles had gone white. I stood up, walked to the sidebar, and poured myself a small glass of bourbon. Took my time about it, let Kyle sweat. "You know, Kyle," I said finally, turning back to face him, "you're right about one thing. I do live simply. This house, the old furniture, the motorcycles in the garage. It probably does look like a trailer park situation to someone like you." Kyle tried to say something, but I held up a hand. "But here's the thing about appearances. They can be deceiving. I learned that in my career. Spent 35 years investigating insurance fraud, which means I spent 35 years watching people try to look richer than they were, or poorer than they were, depending on what scam they were running. You learn to see through the facades. You learn to find the truth hiding beneath the surface." I took a sip of bourbon. David Torres was watching me with something that might have been amusement. "So while you were busy impressing my daughter with talk about managing $50 million in investments," I continued, "I was doing something different. I was actually making investments. Quiet ones, smart ones, the kind you don't brag about at parties." Veronica was staring at me now, her confusion deepening. "Cascade Investment Group is a good company," I said. "Solid management, ethical practices, good returns for investors. That's why about 12 years ago I decided to become one of their major shareholders. Isn't that right, David?" David nodded. "Roland owns 60% of the company, Kyle. He's our largest investor, has been for over a decade." The look on Kyle's face was worth every lonely evening of the past 3 years, every shortened phone call, every dismissive comment, every time he'd convinced my daughter I wasn't worth her time. "So," I said, walking back to my seat and sitting down, "about that trailer park situation you mentioned. Want to reconsider?" Kyle opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He looked at Veronica, then back at me, then at David Torres. His carefully constructed world was crumbling, and everyone in the room could see it happening in real time. I picked up my fork and took a bite of turkey. It was perfectly cooked. "Shall we continue dinner?" I asked pleasantly. The silence was beautiful. The rest of dinner played out like a badly staged play where one of the actors had forgotten his lines. Kyle kept trying to recover, making small talk that died in the air, laughing at jokes nobody told. His hands shook when he reached for his wineglass. Twice he knocked his fork off the table. Each time the clatter seemed impossibly loud. David Torres, to his credit, acted as if nothing unusual had happened. He complimented the turkey, asked Mr. Olson about his cookie recipe, discussed the Portland weather with Chester and Martha. Professional. Smooth. But I caught the slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth whenever Kyle tried to speak. Veronica sat frozen, her eyes moving between me and her husband, like she was watching a tennis match she didn't understand the rules to. She'd barely touched her food. I'd seen that look before, on suspects' faces when they realized the insurance claim they thought was airtight was actually full of holes. The moment when their whole story started to unravel. "Roland," David said, setting down his napkin, "you never told me you restored motorcycles. That Harley in the garage is magnificent." "Thank you," I said. "It's a 67. Original parts, mostly. Took me about a year to track everything down. That must be worth quite a bit. Someone offered me $45,000 for it last month." Kyle made a strangled sound. Everyone ignored him. "And you turned them down?" David asked. "Some things aren't for sale," I said, looking directly at my daughter. "Some things you keep because they matter, not because they're profitable." Veronica's eyes filled with tears. She looked away. The dinner limped to a conclusion. Chester and Martha made their excuses first. They could read a room. Mr. Olson followed shortly after, pressing a small package into my hands. "For later," he whispered. "You handled that well." David stood, shook my hand. "Roland, always a pleasure. We should schedule a meeting next week to discuss the new investment opportunities." He turned to Kyle, his expression cooling by several degrees. "Kyle, I'll see you in the office. Not, 'Have a good evening,' not, 'Merry Christmas.' Just, 'I'll see you in the office.' The kind of statement that carries weight." After they left, it was just the three of us. Me, Veronica, and Kyle. Kyle stood up so fast his chair tipped backward. "We need to go. Now." "Kyle," Veronica started. Now, Veronica. I watched him, really watched him, the way his jaw clenched, the slight tremor in his hands that he couldn't quite hide, the sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the cool temperature in the house. This wasn't just embarrassment. This was fear, and I understood something in that moment. Kyle hadn't just been cruel for sport, he'd been strategic. He'd systematically isolated my daughter from me because he'd assumed I was poor, assumed I'd eventually die and leave nothing behind. He'd been grooming Veronica to forget about her father, so that when inheritance time came, there'd be no emotional complications, no guilt, no second thoughts. He'd been preparing to profit from my death. The realization should have made me angry. Instead, I felt that cold clarity settle deeper. Anger burns hot and fast. What I needed was patience, precision. "Dad," Veronica said quietly, still sitting at the table, "why didn't you tell me? About the money?" "About any of it." Kyle grabbed his coat. "Veronica, we're leaving. This is manipulation. Can't you see that? He's playing games." "I asked my father a question, Kyle." Her voice was sharper than I'd heard it in years. "I'd like to hear the answer." Kyle's face went red, but he stopped talking. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, saw the confusion, the hurt, the dawning realization that maybe, just maybe, things weren't what she'd been told they were. "Because money changes things," I said simply. "It changes how people see you, how they treat you. I wanted to know who loved me for me, not for what I could give them." "That's not fair," Kyle burst out. "You let us think." "I let you make assumptions," I corrected. "I never lied about anything. I live modestly because I choose to. You're the one who decided that meant poor." Veronica stood up slowly, like someone waking from a long sleep. "We should go, Kyle." "Finally," Kyle muttered, already heading for the door. But Veronica didn't follow immediately. She came to me, and for a moment I thought she might hug me the way she used to. Instead, she just looked at me with those eyes I'd known since the day she was born. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Tomorrow, maybe. Just us?" "Of course," without him telling me what to think. Kyle spun around. "Excuse me." Veronica ignored him. "Tomorrow morning. I'll come by around 10. I nodded. She walked to the door, grabbed her coat, and left without looking at Kyle. He stood there for a moment, his face cycling through emotions like a slot machine. Shock, anger, fear, calculation. Then he pointed at me, actually pointed like a child. "You think you're clever, old man. You think you've won something here. But all you've done is make an enemy." I smiled, not a warm smile. The kind of smile that had made insurance fraudsters nervous for 3.5 decades. "Kyle, I've spent my entire career dealing with people who thought they were smarter than everyone else. People who believed their lies so completely that they forgot other people could see the truth. You know what happened to every single one of them?" He didn't answer. "They destroyed themselves," I said quietly. I just held up a mirror. He left, slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. I stood in my dining room, surrounded by the remnants of Christmas dinner, and I started to laugh. Not loud, just a quiet chuckle that grew as I cleared the plates, as I wrapped up leftovers, as I washed dishes in the sink. Because I knew something Kyle didn't know yet. I knew that when you spend 35 years investigating fraud, you develop certain skills. You learn how to find hidden information. You learn how to follow money trails. You learn how to spot patterns that other people miss. And you develop relationships with people who have similar skills. I dried my hands on a towel and pulled out my phone. Scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Marcus Hayes. We'd worked together 15 years ago. He was an investigator for a different insurance company back then. Now he ran a private investigation firm. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "Roland, it's Christmas night, man. This better be good." "I need a favor," I said, "and I'm willing to pay your premium rate." "Must be serious." "It's about my son-in-law," I said, watching the snow begin to fall outside my kitchen window. "And I have a feeling there's more to his story than he's been telling people." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "What kind of more?" "The kind that a financial consultant wouldn't want his employers to know about." "Ah!" I could hear the interest in his voice now. Marcus loved a good hunt. "When do you need this?" "Soon as you can manage it. It'll cost you." "That's fine. And Roland, Merry Christmas, I smiled. Merry Christmas, Marcus. I hung up and looked around my house. My modest, comfortable, carefully chosen house. The house Kyle had mocked. The house Veronica had been taught to be ashamed of. Tomorrow morning my daughter would come here, and I would show her some things. Not everything, not yet, but enough to make her question. Enough to make her wonder if maybe, just maybe, the man she married wasn't who he pretended to be. And after that, well, I had always been a patient man. The snow was falling heavier now, covering everything in white, clean, fresh, like a reset. I thought about Kyle's face when David Torres had spoken. That moment of pure terror. That was just the beginning. Because Kyle Bishop was about to learn what it meant to underestimate someone. What it meant to mock a man who'd spent his entire life learning how to find the truth buried under layers of lies. I poured myself a glass of bourbon and raised it to my reflection in the dark window. Merry Christmas, I said to myself, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the future clicking into place, like pieces on a chessboard. Veronica showed up at 10 minutes past 10 the next morning. She looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from a sleepless night spent thinking. Her eyes were red. She'd been crying. I didn't mention it, just hugged her and led her to the kitchen where I'd already set up coffee and the cinnamon rolls she'd loved since she was 12. You remembered, she said softly, looking at the rolls. I've never forgotten anything about you, sweetheart. She sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd done homework, where we'd had countless conversations, where I'd taught her to play chess when she was 9. Her fingers traced the old scratch mark near the edge, a souvenir from when she'd dropped a science project in 7th grade. Kyle was furious last night, she said finally. He barely spoke to me the whole drive home. When I tried to talk to him, he said I'd humiliated him by staying to talk to you. I poured coffee, said nothing. He told me you'd planned the whole thing, the dinner, inviting his boss, the reveal about the money. He said you did it to make him look small. What do you think? I asked, setting the cup in front of her. She wrapped her hands around it, not drinking. I think I don't know what to think anymore, Dad. 3 years ago, Kyle seemed so perfect, so sure of himself. He had plans, ambitions. He made me feel like we could build something amazing together. She paused. But last night, watching him at that table, he looked scared and mean, like a cornered animal. People show you who they really are when they're under pressure, I said quietly. Is that why you never told me about the money? To see who I really was? No, I said, and I meant it. I never doubted you, Veronica. But I needed to see who Kyle was, and I needed you to see it too. She looked up at me then, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen in 3 years. A flicker of the girl who used to trust my judgment, who used to believe I had her best interests at heart. Show me, she said. Show you what? Whatever you were going to show me, the money, the investments, all of it. I need to see the truth. I got up and retrieved my laptop from the study. When I returned, I opened it and pulled up my banking information, the investment portfolios, the property holdings, the stocks, all of it laid out in numbers that didn't lie. Veronica's eyes got wider with each screen. $4.7 million, she whispered, just sitting there. That's liquid assets, I said. The property and investments bring the total to just over $8 million. Her hand went to her mouth. How? You were a fraud investigator. That doesn't. Pay this well? I smiled. No, it doesn't. But it teaches you things. It teaches you to spot patterns, to see where money flows and why, to understand the difference between people who look wealthy and people who actually are wealthy. I closed the laptop. I started investing 30 years ago. Small amounts. Smart choices. I never touched the principal, just kept reinvesting the returns. Compound interest is a beautiful thing when you have patience. And you've been living like this while you had $8 million? I've been living exactly how I want to live, I corrected. This house is paid off. My motorcycles make me happy. I don't need a bigger car or fancier clothes or a mansion to prove anything to anyone. Money is a tool, Veronica. It's not a lifestyle. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the closed laptop. Kyle told me you were stuck in the past, that you couldn't let go of this house because you were afraid of change. And you believed him. She stopped, started again. He made it sound so reasonable. He'd say things like, "Your dad means well, but he doesn't understand modern finance. He doesn't understand that you need to invest in yourself. Show the world you're successful." And then he'd talk about our future, the life we'd build, and it all seemed to make sense. Did he ever ask what I thought about your future? No, she admitted. He said you wouldn't understand our vision. I reached across the table and took her hand. Veronica, I want you to think about something. In the 3 years you've been with Kyle, how many times has he encouraged you to spend time with me? She thought about it. I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. Never, she said finally. He always had a reason why we couldn't make it. Work events, his friends, networking opportunities. And how many times did he suggest I might be holding you back? Her hand tightened around mine. A lot. Why do you think that is? She pulled her hand away and stood up, walking to the window. Outside, the snow from last night had turned the neighborhood into a winter postcard. I don't know. Because he thought you'd disapprove of him? Or, I said carefully, because he assumed I was poor and wanted to make sure that when I eventually passed away, there'd be no emotional connection left to complicate things. No guilt about the father you'd forgotten. No second thoughts about choices you'd made. She turned to face me, her expression stricken. You think he married me for money? He thought you'd leave me. I think Kyle makes a lot of assumptions based on appearances, I said. I think he saw this house, saw my lifestyle, and made calculations. I think he believed he was marrying someone whose father would be easy to forget, and whose eventual inheritance would be minimal. But that's... She couldn't finish the sentence. Calculating? Mercenary? Yes. I stood up and joined her at the window. I spent 35 years watching people scheme over money they thought they were entitled to. I learned to recognize the signs, the subtle questions about finances, the interest in wills and estates, the way someone positions themselves to benefit from other people's loss. You saw all this in Kyle. From the first time I met him, I admitted, but you loved him, or thought you did, and you're an adult. I couldn't just tell you. You had to see it yourself. She was crying now, silent tears running down her cheeks. I was so mean to you, so dismissive. I believed everything he said. You were in love, I said gently. Love makes us all a little blind sometimes. What do I do now? That was the question, wasn't it? And I had to be careful here. Because what I wanted was for Veronica to leave Kyle immediately, to see him for the manipulative opportunist he was. But if I pushed too hard, she'd resist. She'd defend him out of pride, if nothing else. That's up to you, I said, but maybe start asking yourself some questions. Ask why Kyle lives in an expensive apartment you can barely afford. Ask why he always has the newest phone, the nicest clothes, the best of everything. Ask where the money comes from for a financial consultant who's supposedly so successful, but never seems to have any savings. She wiped her eyes. He says we're investing in our image, that you have to look successful to be successful. And yet I'm worth $8 million and I drive a 15-year-old truck. That got a small, watery laugh out of her. You do love that truck. It runs perfectly. Why replace it? I paused. Veronica, I'm not going to tell you what to do. You're a grown woman. But I am going to give you some advice. Pay attention. Watch how Kyle handles the fallout from last night. Watch what he says, what he does. Watch whether he tries to understand your feelings or whether he tries to control them. She nodded slowly. He's been texting me all morning. Wants to know what we're talking about. And what have you told him? Nothing yet. She looked at her phone, then back at me. Can I stay here for a few days? I need to think. This is your home, I said. It always has been. After she went upstairs to call Kyle and tell him she needed space, I made my own phone call. This one to Lauren Adams, an attorney who specialized in estate planning. We'd never met personally, but she came highly recommended. Mr. Cunningham, she said when her secretary put me through, what can I do for you? I need to revise my will, I said, and I need to set up some protections for property I'm planning to transfer to my daughter. Protections against what? Against a son-in-law who might see it as a payday. She was quiet for a moment. I see. When would you like to come in? Tomorrow, if possible. Let me check. A pause. I can do 2 o'clock. Perfect. After I hung up, I stood in my study, looking at the bookshelf where I kept my professional library. 35 years of case files, fraud patterns, investigative techniques. All that knowledge, all those skills, sitting dormant since I'd retired. Not anymore. My phone buzzed. Marcus Hayes. Got started on your project, he texted. Already found some interesting preliminary information. Call me when you can. I smiled. Interesting preliminary information? That was Marcus. Speak, for your instincts were right. Upstairs, I could hear Veronica's voice, muffled through the floor. She sounded upset. Kyle was probably not taking the news well. I pulled out my old case notebook, the one I'd kept throughout my career for particularly complex investigations, opened it to a fresh page, wrote Kyle Bishop at the top. Then I started making notes. Timeline of his relationship with Veronica. Observable behaviors, red flags, questions that needed answering. Where did his money really come from? What was his debt situation? What did his colleagues at Cascade Investment Group really think of him? What did his financial clients know about his methods? These were questions I knew how to answer. These were puzzles I knew how to solve. The snow had stopped falling and the sun was breaking through the clouds, making everything sparkle, clean, new. I thought about Kyle's face when he'd seen David Torres. That moment of absolute panic. That was just the opening move, and I'd always been good at chess. Patient, strategic, always thinking 3 moves ahead. Kyle Bishop thought he'd been playing me for 3 years. Thought he'd isolated my daughter, positioned himself perfectly, maneuvered all the pieces into place. He had no idea I'd been watching the whole time, learning, planning, waiting for exactly the right moment to make my move. I looked down at the notebook, at Kyle's name written in black ink. Checkmate, I said softly to the empty room. But not yet. Not quite yet. First, I needed to know everything. Every secret, every lie, every vulnerability. And then, when the time was right, I would show Kyle Bishop what it really meant to underestimate someone. I closed the notebook and went to make my daughter some lunch. Patience, I reminded myself. All good things to those who wait. 2 days later, I sat in Marcus Hayes' office in downtown Portland. It was one of those nondescript buildings you walk past 1,000 times without noticing, which was exactly the point. Private investigators don't advertise with flashy signs. Marcus looked exactly as I remembered him from 15 years ago, just with more gray in his beard and a few extra lines around his eyes. He'd always been thorough, relentless, the kind of investigator who could find a needle in a haystack and then tell you the manufacturer. Roland, he said, sliding a folder across his desk, this is preliminary. I've only had 2 days, but I thought you'd want to see what I found so far. I opened the folder. Bank statements, credit card records, transaction histories, all perfectly legal to obtain if you know the right databases and have the right contacts. Kyle Bishop, Marcus said, leaning back in his chair, is living a very interesting double life. On paper, he's a successful financial consultant, pulling in about $120,000 a year. Respectable. Not spectacular, but solid. And off paper? Off paper, he's drowning. Credit card debt totaling $67,000 across 6 different cards. Most of them are maxed out. He's been doing the balance transfer shuffle for at least 2 years, moving debt from one card to another to avoid interest, but that game can't last forever. I looked at the numbers, the restaurants, the clothes, the lease on that Mercedes. Kyle had been burning through money like it was kindling. That's not even the interesting part, Marcus continued. He pulled out another set of documents. These are transaction records from his client accounts at Cascade Investment Group. Notice anything? I scanned the pages. Then I saw it. Regular transfers from client accounts to a personal account. Small amounts, never more than $10,000 at a time. Then, days or weeks later, the money would reappear. He's borrowing from client funds, I said. Without their knowledge or permission, Marcus confirmed. It's not technically theft, since he returns it, but it's a massive ethics violation. If the compliance department at Cascade knew about this, he'd be fired immediately. If his clients knew, they'd file complaints with the State Financial Commission. He'd lose his license. I felt that cold satisfaction settle deeper. This was exactly what I'd suspected. Kyle had been playing a game, pretending to be something he wasn't, using other people's money to maintain the illusion. How did you get these records? I asked. Marcus smiled. I have a friend who works in database security. Kyle's not as careful with his digital footprint as he thinks. And before you ask, yes, it's all admissible. I didn't hack anything. These are records from databases that financial professionals routinely access for legitimate purposes. Is there more? I'm still working on it. Give me another week and I'll have a complete picture of his finances, his associates, and his activities. But Roland, Marcus leaned forward, whatever you're planning, be careful. Men like Kyle, when they're cornered, they don't go quietly. I'm counting on it, I said. I met with Lauren Adams, my attorney, that same afternoon. Her office was in the Pearl District, all glass and steel and modern art. She was younger than I expected, maybe 45, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Mr. Cunningham, she said, gesturing to a chair, you said you wanted to discuss estate planning? Among other things, I laid out what I needed, a revised will that would transfer the house to Veronica, but with specific conditions, a living trust that would protect my assets from anyone who might try to claim them through her, documents that would make it legally impossible for Kyle to benefit from my death in any way. Lauren listened, taking notes. When I finished, she looked up. This is ironclad protection against your son-in-law. May I ask why you feel it's necessary? Because I don't trust him, I said simply, and I want to make sure that if something happens to me, my daughter is protected. Not manipulated. She nodded. I can have the documents ready in 3 days. They'll need to be notarized, and I'd recommend updating your beneficiary designations on all your accounts as well. Whatever you think is best. One more thing, she said, her tone shifting slightly. These protections only work if your daughter knows about them, if she's aware of the conditions and the reasons behind them. Otherwise, you're just creating legal barriers that might confuse her when she's grieving. I plan to tell her everything, I said, when the time is right. Back at home, Veronica was in the kitchen making tea. She'd been staying with me for 3 days now, and slowly I was watching her come back to herself. The tension in her shoulders was easing. She smiled more. She'd even laughed that morning at something Mr. Olson had said when he'd stopped by with more cookies. But her phone kept buzzing, Kyle calling, texting, demanding to know when she was coming home. He's getting desperate, she said, looking at the screen. He called my work yesterday, told my boss I was going through a family crisis and might need some time off. Without asking you first? Without even telling me. My boss called to check if I was okay. I had to explain that no, I'm fine, and no, I don't need time off. She set the phone face down on the counter. He's trying to control the narrative, make it seem like I'm the one having problems. Classic manipulation, I said. Make you seem unstable so that when people ask questions, he can say you're just emotional, going through something, not thinking clearly. She looked at me. Is that what he's been doing this whole time? Making me think I was the problem? Part of it, I said gently. But Veronica, you need to understand something. Manipulators like Kyle, they don't see themselves as the villain. In his mind, he probably genuinely believes he's helping you, guiding you, making your life better. He's convinced himself that his way is the right way. That almost makes it worse, she said quietly. That evening, while Veronica was upstairs reading, I called David Torres. We'd known each other for 12 years, ever since I'd invested in Cascade Investment Group. He was a good man, ethical, the kind of CEO who actually cared about his company's reputation and his employees' conduct. Roland, he said when he answered, I've been expecting your call. Kyle Bishop has been trying to reach you. 4 times yesterday, 3 times today. I haven't answered. I need to share something with you, I said. Information about Kyle's handling of client accounts. It's serious, David. The kind of thing your compliance department would want to know about. There was a pause. How serious? Unauthorized use of client funds. Not theft, but borrowing without permission. Multiple instances over the past 8 months. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. When he spoke again, his voice was cold, professional. Send me what you have. I'll forward it to our legal team and compliance officer. If what you're saying is accurate, we'll need to conduct an internal investigation. I'll send it tonight. Roland, I need to ask, is this personal? Because of what happened at Christmas. It's factual, I said. What Kyle did to me at that dinner, that was personal. What he's been doing with client money, That's criminal negligence at best. I'm not manufacturing evidence, David. I'm just bringing to light what he's been hiding. Another pause. Understood. Send me the files. After I hung up, I sat in my study for a long time, looking at the documents Marcus had provided. The evidence was clear, damning, and Kyle had no idea it even existed. I thought about calling him, warning him, giving him a chance to explain himself. But then I remembered his face at Christmas dinner, the contempt, the mockery, the way he'd talked about my home, my life, my daughter, like we were all inconveniences he had to tolerate. No warnings. I composed an email to David, attached the relevant files, and hit send. Then I went upstairs and knocked on Veronica's door. "Come in," she called. She was sitting on the bed, her old childhood bed, which I'd never gotten rid of, surrounded by photo albums, pictures of her as a kid, us at the beach, her high school graduation, college, her wedding day where she looked radiant, and I'd tried so hard to be happy for her. "Dad," she said, not looking up from a photo. "When did you know? About Kyle, I mean. When did you first realize what he was?" I sat down beside her, picked up a photo of us at her 8th birthday party, both of us covered in cake frosting, laughing. "The first time I met him," I admitted. "He asked about the house within 5 minutes. Not about you, not about your childhood or what you were like growing up. He wanted to know about property values and what the house would sell for." She closed the album. 3 years. I wasted 3 years. "You didn't waste them," I said. "You learned something important. You learned what you don't want in a partner, what you won't tolerate. That's not wasted time, honey. That's education." She leaned her head on my shoulder, just like she used to when she was little. "What happens now?" "Now," I said, "the truth comes out, and Kyle has to face what he's done." The next morning, my phone rang. "Marcus, got something you need to hear," he said. "I was doing surveillance on Kyle last night. Followed him to a bar in northwest Portland. He met up with some friends, had quite a few drinks, started talking. And I recorded it. With his knowledge, Oregon is a one-party consent state. I was sitting 2 tables away, made sure he saw me recording. He was too drunk to care or too stupid to realize what it meant." "What did he say?" Marcus's voice hardened. He said, and I quote, "Just waiting for the old man to kick it. Veronica thinks he's got nothing, but there's got to be something. House is paid off at least. Soon as he's gone, we can finally stop pretending to care." I felt something cold and final settle in my chest. Not anger. Something colder, more absolute. "Send me the recording," I said. "Already in your email. Roland, this is damning stuff. Combined with the financial records, this paints a picture of a man who married your daughter for money he thought she'd inherit." "Thank you, Marcus. You gonna use it?" I thought about Veronica upstairs, looking through old photos, trying to piece together where her marriage had gone wrong, blaming herself. "Yes," I said. "I'm going to use it." The week that followed was quiet on the surface. Veronica went back to work, though she was still staying at my house. Kyle kept calling, kept texting, his messages oscillating between apologetic and accusatory. She stopped answering entirely. I spent my days in the garage, working on the Harley, waiting. Marcus was compiling his final report. David Torres's compliance department was conducting their investigation. Lauren Adams was finalizing the legal documents. All the pieces were moving into position. Then, 8 days after Christmas, Marcus called. "It's done," he said. "Full report. Everything you asked for, and then some. I'm bringing it over." He arrived an hour later with a folder that had to be 2 inches thick. We sat in my study while he walked me through it. Kyle's financial situation was worse than I'd thought. The $67,000 in credit card debt was just the start. He had personal loans, gambling debts. He'd borrowed money from friends and never paid it back. The Mercedes wasn't leased. It was financed at 18% interest because his credit was so bad. The client fund manipulation was systematic. Over 8 months, he'd borrowed a total of $340,000, always returning it before anyone noticed, but always borrowing again. It was a house of cards that would collapse the moment anyone looked closely. And then there was the recording from the bar. Marcus had cleaned up the audio, removed background noise. Kyle's voice came through crystal clear. just waiting for the old man to kick it. I listened to it 3 times. Each time, my resolve hardened. There's one more thing, Marcus said, pulling out a final document. I interviewed some of his colleagues. Off the record. Most wouldn't talk, but one did. Said Kyle's been bragging about his investment strategy, which apparently consists of using client funds as short-term personal loans. He thinks he's brilliant, thinks he's found a loophole. He's found a prison sentence, I said, or at minimum, the end of his career. I looked at all the evidence. Financial crimes, ethical violations, recorded admissions of waiting for my death to profit. It was everything I needed. What are you going to do with this? Marcus asked. I thought about it, about Veronica, about the 3 years Kyle had stolen from her, about the way he'd systematically isolated her from me, convinced her I was a burden, positioned himself to profit from my eventual death. I'm going to give him exactly what he deserves, I said. That afternoon, I called David Torres. David, I'm sending you the complete investigative report. Everything Marcus Hayes found. I think your compliance department will want to see this. How bad is it? Career-ending, possibly criminal. He was quiet for a moment. Send it. I'll forward it to our head of compliance and our legal team. If this is as serious as you say, we'll need to act immediately. One more thing, I said. Kyle has been harassing my daughter, calling her workplace, trying to control when she comes home, making her seem unstable to her colleagues. I thought you should know the kind of person working in your company. Noted, David said. And Roland, thank you for bringing this to our attention. If he's been doing what you say, we can't have someone like that representing Cascade. I sent the files. Then I made copies. One set for Veronica, so she could see the truth documented in black and white. One set for Lauren Adams, in case we needed legal protection. One set for myself. The next day was a Thursday. I was in the garage installing the last chrome piece on the Harley when my phone rang. David Torres. It's done, he said. We called Kyle in this morning, showed him the evidence. He tried to deny it, but we had bank records, transaction logs, dates, and amounts. Everything matched. What happened? We terminated him for cause. He's being escorted out of the building as we speak. And Roland? We're reporting this to the State Financial Commission. He's going to lose his license. He'll never work in finance in Oregon again. I set down my wrench. How did he react? About how you'd expect. Denial, anger, tried to claim you'd fabricated everything, threatened to sue us, sue you, sue everyone. Then he broke down, started crying. Said he'd made mistakes, but always intended to make things right. David's voice was cold. We have 0 tolerance for this kind of behavior. He knew the rules. He broke them anyway. After we hung up, I sat in my garage, looking at the nearly finished motorcycle. 35 years of investigating fraud had taught me one thing above all others. The truth always comes out. Always. You can hide it, bury it, deny it, but eventually it surfaces. Kyle Bishop had built his entire life on lies, on appearances, on borrowed money and borrowed time, and now it was all collapsing. My phone buzzed, a text from Veronica. Kyle just called me. He's furious. Says Dad ruined his life. Says you fabricated evidence. He's screaming. I hung up on him. I texted back. Come home. We need to talk. She arrived 20 minutes later, her face pale. Dad, what did you do? I handed her the folder. All of it. The financial records. The client fund manipulations. The recording from the bar. The investigator's report. Everything. Read it, I said. All of it. Then you tell me if I fabricated anything. She sat at the kitchen table and started reading. I watched her face change as she went through page after page. Disbelief, shock, hurt, anger. By the time she got to the bar recording, tears were streaming down her face. She listened to Kyle's voice. Just waiting for the old man to kick it? Her hands were shaking when she set the phone down. He married me for money, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Money he thought you had but were hiding. Money he thought I'd inherit. Yes? He never loved me. I don't know if he's capable of loving anyone but himself, I said gently. She looked up at me, and I saw something break and reform in her eyes. The last piece of illusion shattering. The final thread of hope for her marriage burning away. He's been fired, I said. David Torres called this morning. Kyle's out at Cascade, and they're reporting him to the state commission. He'll lose his license. Good, she said, and the coldness in her voice surprised even me. He deserves it. He deserves all of it. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered it anyway. You did this. Kyle's voice came through high and strained. You destroyed me. You fabricated evidence. You manipulated everyone. You ruined my career. I didn't fabricate anything, Kyle, I said calmly. I just showed people the truth. The truth about your debts, your ethics violations, your plans for my daughter. You had no right. I had every right to protect my daughter from a con artist, I said, my voice dropping to something colder than I'd intended. You used her. You isolated her from me. You spent 3 years grooming her to forget about her father so that when I died, there'd be no guilt. No hesitation. Just money. That's not... I have you on recording, Kyle. Your own words. Just waiting for the old man to kick it. Remember saying that? At the bar in Northwest Portland? You were drunk, but you meant every word. Silence on the other end. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're going to leave my daughter alone. No more calls. No more texts. No more showing up at her workplace. You're going to sign whatever divorce papers she sends you, and you're going to disappear from our lives. Or what? His voice was pure venom now. Or I send copies of this investigation to every financial firm in Oregon, every bank, every investment company. I make sure that everyone in the industry knows exactly what kind of person you are. You think you can't work in finance now? I'll make sure you can't work anywhere. You can't do that. Watch me, I said, and hung up. Veronica was staring at me, her eyes wide. Dad, I've never heard you talk like that. Some people, I said, only understand one language. Kyle understands threats, understands power, understands consequences. So that's what I gave him. She stood up and hugged me, really hugged me, for the first time in 3 years. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for not giving up on me. Never, I said. I would never give up on you. That night, after Veronica had gone upstairs, I sat in my study and thought about Kyle Bishop, about his face at Christmas dinner when he'd realized who David Torres was, about the panic in his voice on the phone today, about the empire of lies he'd built finally crumbling around him. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I felt satisfied, the way you feel when you've solved a particularly complex case, when all the pieces finally fit together and justice, real justice, prevails. Kyle had called me old, irrelevant, a burden, but he'd forgotten something important. Old didn't mean weak. It meant experienced, patient, strategic. And in the war between youth and experience, experience wins every time. I poured myself a small glass of bourbon and raised it to the window, to the night, to the future. Checkmate, I said softly. And this time, I meant it. I learned the details from David Torres himself. He called me 2 days after our last conversation, and I could hear something like satisfaction in his voice. Thought you'd want to know how it went down, he said. Kyle came in this morning. We scheduled it for 8 o'clock. Wanted the office mostly empty. Fewer witnesses to his humiliation. Who was there? Me. Our head of legal, Patricia Chen. Compliance officer, Robert Marsh. And 2 HR representatives to document everything. He paused. Kyle walked in looking smug. Actually smug. Like he thought we were calling him in to apologize. I could picture it. Kyle in one of his expensive suits, chin up, ready to play the victim, ready to claim I'd somehow tricked everyone. How long did that last? I asked. About 30 seconds. Robert laid out the charges, unauthorized access to client funds. Multiple transfers totaling $340,000 over 8 months. Dates, times, account numbers, everything documented. David's voice hardened. You should have seen his face when Robert showed him the bank statements. His own statements, his own signatures, his own transactions. He went white. Actually white. Like all the blood just drained out of him. I leaned back in my chair, feeling that cold satisfaction settle deeper. What did he say? He tried to deny it first. Said the records were fake, fabricated, that you'd somehow manufactured evidence to destroy him. David laughed, but there was no humor in it. Patricia shut that down fast. Pointed out that these were official bank records, subpoenaed through legal channels. That if he was claiming they were fake, he was accusing multiple financial institutions of fraud. Smart. Then he changed tactics, started saying it was all a misunderstanding, that he'd only borrowed the money temporarily, that he'd always put it back, that it was a common practice in the industry, which it absolutely is not. David's disgust came through clearly. Robert asked him to name one other financial consultant who did this. Kyle couldn't. Started stuttering, sweating. His hands were shaking so bad he knocked over his water glass. I could see it all in my mind. Kyle, the master manipulator, reduced to a stammering mess when confronted with undeniable truth. The man who'd spent 3 years convincing my daughter I was worthless, now revealed as exactly what he'd accused me of being. Worthless himself. How did it end? I told him he was terminated for cause, effective immediately, that we were reporting him to the Oregon Department of Financial Regulation, that every client whose funds he'd touched would be notified, that his license was gone. David paused. He begged Roland. Actually begged. Said he'd made mistakes, but he could fix them, that he needed this job, that he had debts. The $67,000 in credit card debt? Among other things. Turns out he owes his landlord 3 months' rent, has personal loans from at least 2 colleagues. The Mercedes is 1 payment from repossession. David sighed. He built a house of cards, and when one card fell, they all came down. Security escorted him out. Security and HR made him clean out his desk with someone watching, took his keys, his access cards, his laptop. He's blacklisted from the building. If he tries to come back, we'll have him arrested for trespassing. After we hung up, I sat in my study for a while, thinking about Kyle's face when they'd shown him the evidence. The way he must have looked when he realized there was no talking his way out. No charm offensive, no manipulation, just facts, cold and irrefutable. That evening, Veronica was unusually quiet at dinner. She'd been checking her phone constantly, and I knew why. Kyle would be calling, texting, trying to spin this somehow. He's going to call you, I said finally. Probably already has. She nodded. 17 missed calls. 23 texts. I haven't read them. You should, I said gently. Not because you owe him anything, but because you need to see what he does when he's cornered, how he reacts when he can't control the situation. She looked at her phone for a long moment, and then opened the messages. I watched her face change as she scrolled. Confusion, disbelief, anger. He's blaming you, she said. Says you fabricated everything, that you paid people off, that you're jealous of him because he's young and successful. She looked up at me. He says I'm betraying him by staying here, that a wife is supposed to stand by her husband. What do you think? I think... She set the phone down. I think he's a liar. I think he's been lying to me since the day we met, and I think I'm done listening. The phone rang. Kyle. She looked at me and I nodded. She answered on speaker. Veronica, thank God. Kyle's voice came through, strained and high. I've been trying to reach you all day. Where are you? I'm at my father's house. You need to come home. Right now. We need to talk about this. About what? About how you stole from your clients? About how you've been lying to me for 3 years? I didn't steal. I borrowed. There's a difference. His voice was getting louder, more frantic. And your father, he set me up. He manipulated everyone. Don't you see what he's doing? Veronica's voice was ice. What I see is bank records, transaction logs, audio recordings, evidence, Kyle. Real evidence. It's all lies. He fabricated... Stop. Her voice cut through his rant like a blade. Just stop. I've seen the documents. All of them. The debt. The client funds. The recording from the bar where you talked about waiting for my father to die. I know everything. Silence on the other end. Then, you don't understand. I can explain. No, she said. You can't. Because there's no explanation that makes any of this okay. You married me for money you thought I'd inherit. You isolated me from my father. You manipulated me, controlled me, lied to me, and you did it all while pretending to love me. I do love you. He was crying now. I could hear it in his voice. Veronica, please. I made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can... No, we can't. It's over, Kyle. I'm filing for divorce. You can't do this. You can't just... She hung up, set the phone down. Her hands were shaking, but her jaw was set. Determined. How do you feel? I asked. Terrified, she admitted, but also free. For the first time in 3 years, I feel like I can breathe. I reached across the table and took her hand. I'm proud of you. I should have seen it sooner, should have questioned things. You loved him, or thought you did. Love makes us all a little blind sometimes. I squeezed her hand. But you see clearly now. That's what matters. The phone started ringing again. Kyle. She declined the call and blocked his number. What happens now? She asked. Now, I said, you move forward. You rebuild your life, and you remember that you're stronger than you think. That night, after Veronica had gone to bed, I sat in my garage working on the Harley. The engine was almost finished. Just a few more adjustments, and it would be ready to run. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. You haven't won. This isn't over. I'll make you pay for what you've done. Kyle, calling from someone else's phone since Veronica had blocked him. I typed back, the only person who paid was you, Kyle. And you paid with currency you stole. Other people's money, other people's trust, and my daughter's love. You have nothing left to fight with. The response came fast. Watch me. I smiled. Let him threaten. Let him rage. It didn't matter. Because the truth was already out. The evidence was documented. The wheels of justice were already turning. Kyle Bishop's war was over. He just didn't know it yet. I finished adjusting the carburetor on the Harley, wiped my hands clean, and headed inside. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Kyle would try something desperate. They always did. But I'd spent 35 years dealing with desperate people. I knew all their moves before they made them, and I was ready. Kyle's counterattack came 3 days later. I was in Lauren Adams's office, signing the final documents that would transfer the house to Veronica with ironclad protections, when my phone rang. A Portland number I didn't recognize. Mr. Cunningham? A woman's voice, professional. This is Jennifer Walsh from the Portland Tribune. I'm calling about allegations made by Kyle Bishop regarding... No comment, I said, and hung up. Lauren looked up from the documents. Press? Kyle's trying to play the victim. Wealthy retiree destroys poor young consultant's career. I shook my head. It won't work. But over the next 2 days, Kyle tried everything. He called 3 different news outlets, claiming I'd fabricated evidence. He posted on social media about elder abuse in reverse and family manipulation. He even hired a lawyer, though I had no idea where he got the money, and threatened to sue me for defamation. His lawyer, a guy named Richard Paulson, who advertised on bus benches, called me directly. Mr. Cunningham, I represent Kyle Bishop. My client wishes to pursue legal action against you for... For what? I asked calmly. For providing truthful evidence of his financial misconduct to his employer. For protecting my daughter from a manipulative liar. Please, counselor, tell me which law I've broken. Paulson hesitated. My client believes the evidence was obtained illegally. Your client is wrong. Everything was obtained through legal channels by a licensed private investigator. Bank records accessed through legitimate databases. Recordings made in public places in a one-party consent state. I let that sink in. But please, file your lawsuit. Discovery will be fascinating. I'd love to see Kyle explain his $67,000 in credit card debt and his unauthorized client fund transfers in a courtroom. More hesitation. I'll speak with my client. You do that. And counselor, tell Kyle that if he continues to harass my daughter, I'll file for a restraining order. And I'll make sure every news outlet he contacted gets a copy of the evidence he's claiming is fabricated. Paulson hung up without responding. The next morning, Veronica showed me her phone. Kyle had sent her messages through Instagram, Facebook, even LinkedIn. All of them variations on the same theme. She was betraying him. I had manipulated her. They could work things out if she'd just come home. He's getting desperate, she said. Desperation makes people dangerous, I warned. Be careful. Don't go anywhere alone for a while. I underestimated how desperate. That afternoon, while I was at the grocery store, Kyle showed up at the house. Veronica called me immediately, her voice tight with fear. Dad, he's here. He's banging on the door, shouting, saying he just wants to talk. Don't open the door, I said, already heading for the exit. Call the police. Right now. I'm 10 minutes away. I already did. They said they're sending someone. I made it home in 7 minutes. Kyle's Mercedes, somehow still in his possession, was parked haphazardly in my driveway. He was standing on the porch, pounding on the door. "Kyle," I said, climbing out of my truck. He spun around. His eyes were wild. Bloodshot, he looked like he hadn't slept in days. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair uncombed. "You," he snarled. "This is all your fault. Everything was fine until I what? Revealed the truth? Showed my daughter who you really are? You destroyed my life." "No," I said calmly. "You destroyed your own life. With your lies, your manipulation, your theft. I never stole anything. You borrowed client funds without permission. In any legitimate court, that's embezzlement." I walked closer, keeping my voice level. "You married my daughter, planning to profit from my death. You isolated her from me. You manipulated her for 3 years, and now you're upset because you got caught." "I loved her," his voice cracked. "I still love her." "You loved the idea of her, the access she gave you to money you thought I had. But you never loved Veronica herself. If you had, you wouldn't have tried to control every aspect of her life." Police sirens in the distance. Getting closer, Kyle heard them too. His face twisted with rage and desperation. "This isn't over. You think you've won, but You'll what?" I stepped closer and my voice dropped to something cold, something final. "Sue me? With what money? Harass my daughter? Oh, I'll get a restraining order. Try to salvage your reputation? Every financial firm in Oregon knows what you did. You're finished, Kyle. Completely and utterly finished." 2 police cars pulled up. Officers emerged, hands near their weapons. "Sir!" one of them called to Kyle. "Step away from the door." Kyle looked at me, at the police, back at me, and something in him broke. He slumped, deflated. "I just wanted to talk to her," he said, his voice small, pathetic. "She doesn't want to talk to you," I said, "and if you come back here, you'll be arrested for trespassing." The officers escorted Kyle to his car, gave him a formal warning, made him leave. Veronica emerged from the house after they'd gone, shaking. I held her while she cried, not for Kyle, but from the stress, the fear, the final severing of a life she'd built. "It's over," I said. "He won't come back." "How do you know?" "Because he's broken. Men like Kyle, when they lose control, they collapse. He tried every trick he knows. The press, the lawyers, the emotional manipulation, the direct confrontation. None of it worked. He has nothing left." That evening, Lauren Adams called. Paulson withdrew the lawsuit, said his client decided not to pursue legal action. Not surprised. There's more. Kyle's landlord is evicting him. 3 months of unpaid rent. He has 2 weeks to vacate. I thought about that. About Kyle losing his job, his reputation, his wife, and now his home. All in less than 3 weeks. Some might have felt pity. I felt justice. "One more thing," Lauren said. "The house transfer is complete. Veronica is now the legal owner, with all the protections we discussed in place. Kyle can't touch it. Even if they're still technically married, the property is secure." "Thank you, Lauren." After I hung up, I went to the garage and finished the last adjustments on the Harley. The engine turned over smooth and clean. Perfect. 35 years investigating fraud had taught me many things, but the most important lesson was this. The truth doesn't need defense. It just needs light. I'd given Kyle's truth light, and it had burned him to ash. Veronica appeared in the garage doorway. "Dad, David Torres is here. Says he wants to talk to you." David stood in my driveway, looking tired but satisfied. "Thought you should know. The State Financial Commission completed their investigation. Kyle Bishop's license has been permanently revoked. He'll never work in finance in Oregon again. Probably anywhere in the country. These things get around. What about his clients? We've contacted all of them. None are pursuing charges, the money was always returned, but they've all withdrawn their accounts. Several filed formal complaints. Kyle's reputation is," he searched for the word, "destroyed doesn't quite cover it." "Good," I said simply. David smiled slightly. "You know, when you first invested in Cascade 12 years ago, I thought you were just a quiet retiree with smart investment instincts. I had no idea you were this strategic." "I'm not strategic," I said. "I'm just patient. I wait for people to show me who they are. Then I believe them." After David left, I stood in my garage, looking at the restored Harley, thinking about Kyle Bishop. He'd called me old, irrelevant, a burden, but old meant experienced. It meant I'd seen his type before, knew the patterns, knew how it would end. Kyle had tried to fight back, had thrown everything he had at me, and it hadn't been enough. Because in the end, you can't fight the truth. You can only face it, and Kyle Bishop was finally facing his. The next 2 weeks unfolded like a slow-motion collapse. I didn't have to do anything, just watch as Kyle's world crumbled piece by piece. Marcus Hayes kept me updated. "He's making the rounds," Marcus said over the phone. "Every financial firm in Portland, investment companies, banks, even tried a few insurance agencies. And same response everywhere. We'll keep your resume on file," which is corporate speak for, "Don't call us. We'll never call you." Marcus paused. "Portland's financial community isn't that big, Roland. Word travels fast. Everyone knows what he did." I pictured Kyle in his rumpled suit, shaking hands with HR managers who'd already decided to pass, smiling that practiced smile that no longer convinced anyone, watching opportunity after opportunity slip away. He tried to get his old colleagues to vouch for him, Marcus continued. 3 of them. All refused. One actually told him to stop calling. The loans he took from them? Unpaid. All of them. He's burned every bridge he had. 2 days later, Richard Paulson called, Kyle's lawyer. "Mr. Cunningham, I'm calling to inform you that my client is withdrawing all legal action against you." Smart decision. He also wanted me to convey, Paulson hesitated, "He's moving out of state, leaving Portland. He asked that you leave him alone." I almost laughed. "Counselor, I haven't contacted Kyle once. Not a single call, text, or email. Everything that's happened to him has been the natural consequence of his own actions." "I understand. I'm passing along the message." "Tell Kyle this," I said. "Tell him I hope he learns something from this experience, that actions have consequences, that you can't build a life on lies and expect it to stand." Paulson was quiet. "I'll tell him." That evening, Veronica's phone rang. Unknown number. She looked at me and I nodded. She answered on speaker. "Veronica." Kyle's voice was different, smaller, defeated. "Please, just give me 5 minutes." "Why?" Her voice was steady, cold. "Because I need you to understand. I made mistakes. I know that. But I can change. We can start over. Move somewhere new. I can—" "Kyle, stop." She took a breath. "I've had 3 weeks to think about everything. About us. About what you did. And I've realized something." "What?" "You never loved me. You loved the idea of me. The daughter of a man you thought was poor and pathetic. Someone who'd be grateful for your attention. Someone you could control." Her voice hardened. "You thought you'd marry me, wait for my father to die, collect whatever small inheritance there was, and move on to someone more useful. That's not. But here's what you didn't count on. My father isn't poor. He isn't pathetic. And he didn't need to die for you to reveal exactly who you are." She paused. "You know what he taught me these past few weeks. Dignity. Self-respect. The difference between someone who loves you and someone who uses you." "Veronica, please." "I'm filing for divorce, Kyle. The papers will be delivered tomorrow. Sign them and leave my family alone. Or don't sign them and we'll go to court, where every detail of your financial misconduct will become public record. Your choice." She hung up. Her hands were shaking, but her jaw was set. "Proud of you," I said. "I should have done it weeks ago." "You did it when you were ready. That's what matters." The next morning I was in my garage finishing the final polish on the Harley when David Torres arrived. No call ahead. Just pulled up in his BMW and walked straight to the garage. "Roland," he said, "got news. Thought you'd want to hear it in person." I set down the polishing cloth. "What happened?" "State Financial Commission completed their investigation. Kyle Bishop's license has been permanently revoked in Oregon. They're also filing notices with regulatory bodies in Washington, California, and Idaho. He's effectively blacklisted from the finance industry on the entire West Coast." "What about the clients?" "We settled with all of them. Full restitution for any fees paid during the period Kyle was manipulating their accounts, plus damages. Cost the company just over $200,000, but it was the right thing to do." David looked at the Harley. "That's beautiful work." "Thanks, it's done. Just finished it this morning." He ran his hand along the chrome. You know, when you invested in Cascade 12 years ago, I thought I knew you. Quiet guy. Smart with money. Good instincts. But these past few weeks, I've seen something else. You're strategic. Patient. You let people reveal themselves before you make your move. I just waited for the truth to come out. You orchestrated the truth coming out, David corrected. You knew exactly what Kyle was. Probably knew from the moment you met him. But you waited. Let him think he'd won. Let him get comfortable. And then, when the time was right, you showed everyone who he really was. I thought about Christmas dinner, about Kyle's face when he'd seen David at my table. I didn't fabricate anything. I just provided evidence. Evidence you methodically gathered through a private investigator you hired specifically for this purpose. David smiled slightly. Roland, I've been in business 30 years. I know the difference between luck and strategy. This was strategy. Brilliant strategy. After he left, I sat with the Harley for a while. Started it up. The engine purred perfectly. Smooth. Powerful. Ready. 35 years of investigating fraud. 35 years of watching people lie, scheme, manipulate. 35 years of learning to be patient, to gather evidence, to wait for exactly the right moment to act. Kyle had called me old, had mocked my home, my life, my choices, had systematically poisoned my relationship with my daughter for 3 years, and now he was leaving Portland. Broken, unemployable, his reputation destroyed, his marriage over, his debts mounting. Not because I'd attacked him, but because I'd simply let the truth be known. My phone buzzed, a text from Veronica. Kyle's brother just picked him up. He's leaving Portland. It's really over. I texted back, yes, it is. That evening, Veronica and I sat on the back porch, watching the winter sun set over Portland. She was quiet, processing, healing. Dad, she said finally, did you plan all of this from the beginning? I planned to protect you, I said. The rest? The rest was just Kyle being Kyle. I didn't make him steal from clients, didn't make him rack up debt, didn't make him talk about waiting for me to die. I just made sure the right people knew about it. You're scary when you're patient, she said, but she was smiling. Patience is a superpower, I said, especially when dealing with people who think they're smarter than everyone else. She leaned her head on my shoulder. What now? Now you rebuild. You remember who you are, and you never let anyone make you forget again. The Harley sat in the garage, gleaming under the overhead light, a project that took a year, broken pieces restored, made whole again, kind of like my daughter. Kyle Bishop was gone. His influence, his manipulation, his lies, all of it gone. And in the quiet of that winter evening, I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years. Peace. The divorce was finalized in mid-January. Kyle signed the papers without contest. He couldn't afford a lawyer anyway. Last I heard, he'd moved to Montana to live with his brother, working some kind of manual labor job, a long way from the financial consultant who'd lectured me about investment strategies. Veronica and I sat in the kitchen on Hawthorne Boulevard, the same kitchen where she'd done homework as a child, where we'd had countless conversations, where everything had fallen apart and then, slowly, come back together. How did you know? She asked. From the beginning, I mean. How did you know what Kyle was? I thought about that first meeting, the way Kyle's eyes had appraised my house, the calculations behind his smile. Because I spent 35 years watching people try to get money they didn't earn. After a while, you develop a sense for it. You can spot the tells. And you let me marry him anyway? You're an adult. I couldn't just tell you he was a con artist. You had to see it yourself. Sometimes the only way to truly understand something is to experience it. I squeezed her hand. But I never stopped watching, never stopped protecting you, even when you thought I'd given up. She smiled through tears. Thank you for being patient with me. Always? Outside, snow was falling again. Portland in winter, peaceful and clean. The Harley was finished, waiting in the garage for spring, when we could take it out on the roads. Maybe drive down to the coast. Maybe just cruise through the city. The house was hers now, legally protected, with safeguards that would ensure no one could ever manipulate her into giving it up. The money, all $8 million of it, would be hers someday too, with the same protections. But more importantly, she had something Kyle could never take away: her dignity, her strength, her understanding of her own worth. You know what's funny? Veronica said, looking out at the snow. Kyle spent 3 years trying to make me ashamed of you, of this house, of our life, and now I can't imagine being anywhere else. This house was never the problem, I said. Neither was I. The problem was Kyle's inability to see value in anything that didn't have a price tag. She laughed. Next Christmas, we're doing it differently. No pretense, no masks, just us. Maybe Chester and Martha, Mr. Olson, people who actually matter. Sounds perfect. I thought about Kyle's face at that Christmas dinner, the moment he'd realized who David Torres was, the way his entire world had shifted in an instant. That moment had set everything else in motion. Justice, swift and certain. Kyle had wanted to profit from my death. Instead, he'd destroyed himself with his own greed, his own lies, his own arrogance. I hadn't needed to attack him, just needed to hold up a mirror and let everyone see what he really was. Dad? Veronica said, I love you. I love you too, sweetheart. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering everything in white. Clean, new, a fresh start. Kyle Bishop was gone. The truth had won, and my daughter was home. You know, Veronica said, next Christmas is going to be different. No lies, no games, just family. I smiled and raised my coffee cup. Just family, I agreed. And somewhere in the falling snow, I could hear the future calling. Not the future Kyle had planned, one where I was dead and he was rich, but the real future, the one where truth mattered, where patience paid off, where justice, real justice, prevailed. Justice had won. My daughter was safe, and this old man who'd been called irrelevant had proven that age wasn't weakness. It was wisdom, and wisdom, in the end, always wins. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.